The soft hum of chatter filled the air as I leaned back in my chair, absently stirring the now cold coffee in front of me. It was one of those lazy Sunday afternoons where time seemed to stretch endlessly, and yet it felt like there wasn't enough of it to sort through the tangled mess inside my head. My best friend, Ayan, had invited me over for what he called a family lunch, but really, it was just an excuse for his mom to feed everyone within a 5-mile radius. Still, I didn't mind. His house always felt like a second home, warm, welcoming, and full of life that I glanced around the room, taking in the familiar chaos. Plates clinking together on the dining table, laughter spilling out from the kitchen, and the faint scent of spices lingering in the air. But something, or rather, someone, caught my attention today. Zane, Ayan's older brother, sat across the room, scrolling through his phone with a quiet intensity that made him seem almost otherworldly. He wasn't usually part of these gatherings. He lived in another city for work, so seeing him here felt unexpected. Zane had always been this enigmatic figure in my life. Growing up, I'd only ever seen glimpses of him during holidays or family functions, and even then, he kept mostly to himself. There was something about the way he carried himself, his broad shoulders relaxed but commanding, his dark eyes sharp and observant, that made people instinctively give him space. And yet, when he did speak, his voice was low and steady, carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with his otherwise reserved demeanor. Today, though, there was something different about him. Maybe it was the way his lips curved slightly upward when Ayan cracked a joke, or how his gaze lingered just a fraction longer than necessary when our eyes met earlier. Or maybe it was the fact that I couldn't stop noticing him. Whatever it was, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite put into words. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself stealing glances at him whenever I thought no one was looking. Each time, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just curiosity or maybe boredom, but deep down I knew better. There was an undeniable pull, a magnetic energy that drew me toward him despite my efforts to resist that IT wasn't supposed to be like this. Zane was Ayan's brother, which meant he was firmly off limits. Not just because of familial loyalty, but because I'd never allowed myself to think of him that way before. Yet here I was, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was brewing beneath the surface. Something I wasn't ready for. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ayan pulled me aside while Zane helped clear the dishes. "You okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been kind of quiet all day." "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." He studied me for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but let it drop. "All right, man. Just don't overthink things too much, yeah?" Overthink things. If only he knew how ironic his advice was. Because as much as I wanted to dismiss the strange tension simmering between Zane and me, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that everything was about to change, and not necessarily in a way I could prepare for by the time the night wound down and everyone started heading home. I realized I hadn't spoken more than a few words to Zane all day. Part of me was relieved, but another part, a deeper, more vulnerable part, felt oddly disappointed. As I stood by the door saying goodbye, he finally approached me, his presence filling the small entryway. For a brief moment, we simply looked at each other, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging heavy in the air. "I'll see you around," he said softly, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Was it hesitation? Longing? Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my mind racing. And just like that, the seed was planted, an unspoken connection neither of us could deny, setting the stage for everything that would follow. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not here, not now. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And mine came in the form of Zane showing up at my workplace 2 weeks after that fateful family lunch that I was in the middle of organizing inventory in the back room of the small bookstore where I work part-time. The shop was quiet that afternoon, with only the occasional customer wandering through the aisles. My mind was elsewhere, replaying fragments of conversations from Ayan's house, wondering if I'd imagined the strange energy between Zane and me. When the bell above the door chimed softly. "Hey, can someone help me find something?" A voice called out, low and familiar enough to make my stomach flip. I froze for a second, clutching the stack of books in my hands tighter than necessary. That voice, it couldn't be him, could it? Shaking off the thought, I stepped out from behind the shelves, plastering on my usual polite smile. And there he was, standing near the fiction section, looking as effortlessly put together as ever. His leather jacket hung loosely over his shoulders, and his dark hair was slightly tousled, as though he'd run his fingers through it absent-mindedly. He glanced up as I approached, and our eyes locked. "Oh," he said, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "Didn't think I'd see you here." "Zane," I blurted out before I could stop myself, immediately regretting how surprised I sounded. "What are you doing here?" He chuckled, the sound warm and easy, sending an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Looking for a book, obviously. What else would I be doing in a bookstore?" I rolled my eyes despite myself, feeling some of the tension ease. "Right. Sorry. I just didn't peg you as much of a reader." His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes. "And why's that?" "I don't know," I admitted, shrugging. "You always seem more like the action movies and sports type." "Well, maybe you don't know me as well as you think," he replied, his tone teasing but laced with something deeper, an invitation. Almost for a moment, we simply stood there, the air thick with unspoken words. Then he gestured toward the shelves behind me. "Anyway, I'm looking for something meaningful, something that'll stick with me, you know? Any recommendations?" The question caught me off guard. Meaningful. The word echoed in my mind, stirring something I couldn't quite name. It felt oddly personal, like he was asking for more than just a book suggestion. Still, I nodded and led him to one of the quieter corners of the store, where the classics were kept. As I scanned the titles, I found myself talking, not just about books, but about stories that had stayed with me, moments that had shaped who I am today. To my surprise, Zane listened intently, his gaze never wavering. "You really love this stuff, don't you?" he said finally, his voice softer now, tinged with admiration. "It's comforting," I admitted, hesitating before adding. "Books have a way of saying things people can't." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that." We fell silent then, the weight of his presence pressing against me. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the void, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I handed him a copy of The Great Gatsby, its worn cover smooth beneath my fingertips. "Here, start with this. It's about longing, obsession, dreams, all the messy stuff we try to avoid thinking about." He took the book from me, his fingers brushing against mine for the briefest moment. The contact sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric, and I quickly pulled my hand away, pretending to adjust the stack of books beside me. When I looked up again, he was watching me, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I'll let you know what I think." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my thoughts spiraling. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my head. Why'd he come to my bookstore? Why'd he sought me out specifically? And why did every glance, every word, feel so charged with meaning? But it wasn't just confusion gnawing at me. It was fear. Fear of what this growing connection might mean, of the emotions bubbling beneath the surface that I wasn't ready to confront. Because no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, there was no denying the pull I felt toward him. It terrified me, not because of who he was, but because of what it revealed about me. Growing up, I'd always been careful to keep parts of myself hidden. Being gay wasn't something I openly talked about, especially not in spaces where it felt unsafe. Even with Ayan, my closest friend, I never fully opened up about my struggles with identity and acceptance. So the idea of letting someone new, someone as complicated and magnetic as Zane, into that vulnerable space felt like stepping onto thin ice. What if he rejected me? Worse, what if he judged me? These thoughts swirled endlessly in my mind, keeping me awake long into the night. But even amidst the fear, there was a stubborn spark of hope, a tiny voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. The next day, I received a text from Zane. It was short and simple. Finish the book. Can we talk about it? My heart skipped a beat. Talk about it. Here I was trying to process my own feelings, and he wanted to dive deeper into the very themes I'd used as a metaphor for my inner turmoil. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to retreat back into the safety of distance and denial. But another part, the part that craved connection, understanding, and maybe even something more, pushed me to respond. Sure, I typed back. When and where? His reply came almost instantly. Tomorrow evening. Coffee shop near your place? I stared at the screen for a long moment, my pulse quickening. This was dangerous territory, and I knew it. Yet, as I set the phone down and exhaled slowly, I realized I didn't want to say no. Whatever this was, whatever it might become, I owed it to myself to see it through. Little did I know that coffee shop meeting would change everything. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows fogged with condensation from the chilly autumn air. I arrived 10 minutes early, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my jacket as I paced nervously outside. The neon sign above the door flickered faintly, casting a soft glow over the pavement. My mind raced with possibilities. What would we talk about? Would it feel awkward? Forced? Or worse, what if he saw right through me and realized how much I'd been overthinking this? When Zane finally appeared, rounding the corner with his hands full of books and a scarf loosely draped around his neck, my breath caught in my throat. He looked effortlessly put together, as always, but there was something softer about him today, a vulnerability in the way he smiled when he spotted me. Hey, he said, his voice warm despite the cool breeze swirling around us. Sorry I'm late. Got carried away at the library. I raised an eyebrow, unable to suppress a grin. At the library? You're really leaning into this whole bookish thing, huh? He laughed, the sound low and melodic, sending a ripple of warmth through me. What can I say? You've inspired me. His words hung in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. I cleared my throat, gesturing toward the door. Shall we go in? Inside, the cafe was cozy and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. We found a small table near the back, tucked away from the bustle of other patrons. As we settled in, Zane pulled out the copy of The Great Gatsby I'd recommended, along with two others he'd borrowed from the library. So, he began, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. I finished it, and wow, it hit harder than I expected. Oh yeah, I asked, trying to keep my tone casual even as my heart pounded. How so? He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the book in front of him. It's like Gatsby spends his whole life chasing this dream, this idea of someone who doesn't even exist anymore. And it made me think about how often we do that. Chase things that aren't real, or people who will never truly see us for who we are. His words struck a chord deep within me, resonating in ways I wasn't prepared for. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes. That's exactly why I love it. It's heartbreaking, but also kind of beautiful, you know? Like, even though he's chasing something impossible, he still believes in it. In her. Zane nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, belief is powerful, isn't it? Even when it hurts. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, charged with unspoken emotions. Then, almost instinctively, our hands brushed against each other as we both reached for the sugar packets at the same time. The contact was fleeting, barely noticeable, but it sent a jolt through me all the same. I quickly pulled my hand back, pretending to focus intently on stirring my coffee. You okay? Zane asked, his tone teasing but laced with concern. Yeah, fine, I muttered, avoiding his gaze. Just clumsy. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. You're not clumsy. You're just distracted. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, yet tinged with amusement, made my cheeks flush. I took a sip of my coffee to distract myself, the bitter heat grounding me momentarily. But no amount of caffeine could drown out the storm brewing inside me. Over the next few weeks, these meetings became a sort of ritual. Sometimes we'd meet at the coffee shop. Other times, we'd wander through the city together, exploring hidden bookstores, art galleries, or quiet parks where the leaves crunched underfoot. Each outing brought us closer, unraveling layers of ourselves that neither of us had shared with anyone else. Point one evening, as we strolled along the riverbank, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, Zane turned to me with a mischievous glint in his eye. Tell me something no one else knows about you. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden question. Like what? Anything, he pressed, his smile widening. A secret fear, a weird habit, your deepest desire. It's up to you. I hesitated, my mind racing. There were so many things I kept locked away, buried beneath years of self-preservation. But something about the way he looked at me, with curiosity, not judgment, made me want to open up just a little. I used to write letters, I admitted quietly, kicking a pebble off the path, to people I cared about, but never sent them. They were too personal, I guess. Too raw. Zane tilted his head, intrigued. Why didn't you send them? Because I trailed off, searching for the right words. Because I was scared. Scared they wouldn't understand, or worse, that they'd pity me. So I kept them hidden, like some kind of time capsule of everything I couldn't say out loud. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. That must have been lonely. It was, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But it felt safer than risking rejection. We walked in silence for a while after that, the weight of my confession hanging between us. Just when I thought he might change the subject, he stopped abruptly, turning to face me. You don't have to be afraid with me, he said firmly, his gaze steady and unwavering. Whatever you're holding back, you could trust me. His words hit me like a tidal wave, washing away years of built-up walls in an instant. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry this burden alone. Of course, it wasn't all heavy conversations and emotional revelations. There were lighter moments too, moments that reminded me why I enjoyed spending time with him in the first place. Like the time we got lost trying to find a supposedly haunted bookstore downtown, only to end up at a kitschy souvenir shop instead. Or the afternoon we spent debating the merits of superhero movies versus literary adaptations, complete with exaggerated gestures and dramatic reenactments of key scenes. You're ridiculous, I told him during one such debate, laughing so hard my sides hurt. And you're biased, he shot back, grinning ear to ear. Admit it, you secretly love action movies. Never, I declared, crossing my arms playfully. Books will always win. Challenge accepted, he teased, leaning closer. Next time, I'm picking the movie. No arguments. Despite the banter, there was an undeniable undercurrent of intimacy in these moments. Every shared laugh, every accidental brush of our shoulders felt like another thread weaving us closer together. And yet, with each step forward, my internal conflict grew louder. Part of me wanted to lean into this connection fully, to let myself fall without reservation. But another part, the cautious, guarded part, kept whispering warnings in my ear. What if this was all temporary? What if I let myself hope, only to have my heart shattered in the process? Still, whenever doubt crept in, Zane had a way of silencing it. Whether it was the gentle pressure of his hand on mine during a quiet moment, or the way his laughter lit up the room, he made it impossible to stay distant for long. And then, one rainy evening, everything changed. The rain had started suddenly, a torrential downpour that drenched the city in minutes. Zane and I had been walking back from dinner, a cozy little Italian place tucked away on a side street, when the skies opened up. Without hesitation, he grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the nearest shelter, an old bus stop with cracked glass panels and peeling paint. We ducked inside just as the storm intensified, water cascading off the roof in sheets. Guess we're stuck here for a bit, Zane said, shaking droplets from his hair. His jacket was soaked through, clinging to his shoulders, but he didn't seem to care. Instead, he leaned against the wall, watching me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. That I nodded, trying to catch my breath, not just from the sprint, but from the way his touch still lingered on my skin. It looks like it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence, rhythmic and soothing, yet somehow amplifying the tension between us. My heart raced as I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He looked different tonight, softer, more open, and it unnerved me in the best possible way. You know, he began, his voice low and steady. I've been thinking about something. Oh, yeah, I asked, feigning nonchalance even as my pulse quickened. What's that? He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground before meeting mine again. About us. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. My stomach flipped, and I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Us. I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. Zane straightened, stepping closer until there was hardly any space between us. His presence was overwhelming, intoxicating, and I found myself instinctively leaning back against the wall, trapped not by fear, but by something far more dangerous: anticipation. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his tone raw and unguarded. Every conversation, every laugh, every damn look you give me, it's all I think about. And I don't know what that means or what it's supposed to be, but I do know one thing. I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. His confession hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. For weeks, I've been wrestling with these same feelings, burying them under layers of doubt and fear. But hearing him say it aloud, so boldly, so honestly, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I stammered, struggling to find the right words. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied quickly, his voice softening. Not yet. I just needed you to know, needed to get it out before I lost my nerve. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, casting sharp shadows across his face. In that fleeting moment, I saw everything: the vulnerability, the hope, the quiet desperation, and it broke something loose inside me. All the walls I'd built, all the fears I'd clung to, seemed insignificant compared to the truth staring me in the face. I feel it too, I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Whatever this is, I feel it too. Relief washed over his features, followed by something else, something deeper, more primal. Before I could react, he closed the distance between us, his hands framing my face as he pressed his forehead to mine. His breath was warm against my lips, uneven and shaky, mirroring the storm raging inside me. Tell me to stop, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. If you don't want this, tell me now. But I couldn't. Not when every fiber of my being screamed for him to stay, to take the leap with me. So instead, I reached up, threading my fingers through his damp hair, and pulled him closer. Our lips met in a kiss that was equal parts tender and desperate, a collision of longing and relief that left me dizzy. Time seemed to stand still as the world around us faded into nothingness. The rain continued to pour, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, matching the rhythm of his. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me flush against him, and I melted into the embrace, letting go of every fear, every doubt, if only for a moment. When we finally pulled apart, gasping for air, the reality of what had just happened crashed over me like a wave. My mind raced, torn between elation and panic. What did this mean? Where did we go from here? Zane must have sensed my turmoil because he cupped my face gently, forcing me to meet his eyes. We'll figure it out, he promised, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling in his gaze. Together. And for the first time, I believed him. The walk home was surreal, the streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights as the rain tapered off. Neither of us spoke much, content to simply exist in the aftermath of what had transpired. Every brush of his fingers against mine sent sparks shooting through my veins, reminding me that this wasn't a dream. It was real. But as we reached my apartment building, reality began to creep back in. Ayan's face flashed in my mind, along with all the complications that came with loving his brother. How would he react? Would he understand? Or would this destroy the friendship I'd cherished for years? I should go, Zane said softly, breaking the silence. It's late. I nodded, though every part of me wanted to beg him to stay. Yeah, okay. He hesitated, his hand lingering on mine. This changes things, doesn't it? It does, I admitted, my voice trembling. But maybe that's not a bad thing. He smiled faintly, leaning in to press a gentle kiss to my forehead. Good night. As I watched him disappear into the night, my mind buzzed with questions and possibilities. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every moment was charged with anticipation, my mind ricocheting between euphoria and dread. Zane and I hadn't spoken since that night, neither of us brave enough to breach the fragile silence that had settled between us. It wasn't avoidance, exactly, more like a mutual understanding that we needed time to process what had happened. But the absence of his voice in my life left an ache I couldn't ignore. Make the tea work. I found myself distracted, replaying fragments of our kiss over and over again. The memory of his touch lingered on my skin, vivid and electric, even as guilt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. What if someone found out? What if Ion did? The mere thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. My best friend's face swam into my mind unbidden, his easy smile, his unwavering trust, and I felt sick with shame. How could I have let this happen? But it wasn't just Ion haunting me. It was everyone, my coworkers, strangers on the street, even the barista at the coffee shop who always greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, book guy." Would they see the truth written all over me? Would they judge me for loving someone I shouldn't? By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted Zane late one evening, my fingers trembling as I typed out the words. "We need to talk," that he responded almost immediately. "I know. Can we meet tomorrow? Same place?" Relief flooded through me, though it was short-lived. The next day, as I approached the bus stop where everything had changed, my stomach churned with nerves. Zane was already there, leaning against the wall with his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said softly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Hey," I replied, mirroring his tone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, I broke the silence. "This can't happen again." His jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that. It's not because I don't want it." I rushed to clarify, my words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. "God, Zane, you have no idea how much I want it. But it's complicated. You're Ion's brother. And if he finds out, he won't." Zane interrupted, his voice firm despite the storm brewing in his eyes. "Not unless we tell him. That's not the point." I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "The point is, this isn't just about us. It affects everyone. Him, your family, me, everything." Zane stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "And what about us? Are we just supposed to pretend nothing happened? Pretend we don't feel anything?" "I don't know." I snapped, running a hand through my hair. "I don't have all the answers, okay? All I know is that this is dangerous. For both of us." He stared at me for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Then, quietly, he said, "You're scared." It wasn't a question. And he was right. I was terrified. Terrified of losing Ion, of being rejected by the people I cared about most, of letting myself hope only to have it ripped away. But admitting that felt like giving up, like surrendering to the fear instead of fighting for what I wanted. Yes, I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I am scared." To my surprise, Zane didn't push further. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing mine lightly. "So am I," he confessed, his tone raw and vulnerable. "But I don't regret it. Not for a second." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. Part of me wanted to pull away, to protect myself from the inevitable fallout. But another part, a stronger, braver part, wanted to hold on, to fight for this connection no matter the cost. Things grew increasingly tense after that conversation. We tried to keep our distance, avoiding situations where we might be alone together. But fate has a cruel sense of humor, and it wasn't long before reality came crashing down around us. The tea started innocently enough, a group outing organized by Ion to celebrate his promotion. Everyone was invited, friends, family, colleagues. I told myself it would be fine, that I could handle seeing Zane without letting my emotions show. But the moment he walked into the room, my resolve crumbled, that he looked effortlessly handsome in a fitted navy sweater, his dark hair styled just messy enough to look intentional. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded living room, and I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the same pull that had drawn me to him from the beginning. I quickly looked away, focusing instead on the drink in my hand. You all right? Ayan asked, sidling up beside me with a grin. You seem distracted. I'm fine, Elid, forcing lasmide. Just tired, I guess. He studied me for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but let it drop. Alricht, man. Let me know if you need anything. As the night wore on, I did my best to blend into the background, keeping conversations light and steering clear of Zane whenever possible. But avoiding him proved impossible when Ayan announced a game of charades, pairing everyone off randomly. Of course, fate decided to pair me with Zane. We stood awkwardly at the front of the room, the weight of unspoken tension pressing down on us. The first few rounds were manageable. We communicated through gestures and glances, careful not to linger too long on each other. But then came a particularly tricky word, and frustration bubbled to the surface. Come on, Zane muttered under his breath, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's obvious. No, it's not. I hissed back, exasperation color in my tone. How am I supposed to guess if you won't give me a clue? He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Fine. Just focus, okay? The intimacy of the exchange didn't escape notice. Someone wolf whistled from the audience, and the room erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned as I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were standing, how easily we fell into sync despite everything. When the game ended, I retreated to the balcony, desperate for fresh air. Zane followed moments later, closing the door behind him with a soft click. We can't keep doing this, he said, his voice low but urgent. Running away every time things get hard. And what do you suggest we do instead? I shot back, turned to face him. Tell Ayan the truth? Watch as everything falls apart. No, he replied firmly. But we can't live in limbo forever either. Sooner or later, we'll have to make a choice. His words hung in the air, heavy and final. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the sound of footsteps interrupted us. Ayan appeared in the doorway, concern etched across his face. Everything okay out here? He asked, glancing between us. Yeah, I said quickly, plastering on a smile. Just getting some air. Ayan nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. All right, don't stay out too long. You're missing all the fun. As he disappeared back inside, Zane let out a shaky breath. This isn't going to work, he murmured, more to himself than to me. We need a plan. A plan. I echoed, incredulous. What kind of plan? One that gives us a chance, he replied simply, even if it means taking a risk. The determination in his voice sent a surge of hope coursing through me, mingled with a healthy dose of fear. Whatever lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. Staying stuck in this purgatory wasn't an option. It was time to decide, together, what we were willing to fight for. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet determination. Zane and I met in secret, hashing out a plan that felt equal parts reckless and necessary. We knew we couldn't keep living in the shadows, tiptoeing around Ayan and the rest of the world. It wasn't fair to him, to us, or to the fragile connection we'd fought so hard to build. So, after much deliberation, we decided to tell Ayan the truth, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of honesty. Choosing the right moment was agonizing. We wanted it to be private, away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers. Finally, one Saturday afternoon, Zane invited Ayan over to his apartment under the guise of catching up. I arrived early, my stomach churning with nerves as I paced the length of his living room. Zane sat on the couch, watching me with a mix of apprehension and resolve. You don't have to do this, he said quietly, though I could hear the unspoken plea in his voice. He didn't want me to back out, not now. Yes, I do, I replied, stopping mid-step to face him. If we're going to make this work, we need to start with the truth. He nodded, standing to join me. His hand found mine, squeezing gently, and for the first time all day, I felt a flicker of calm. Whatever happened next, at least we'd face it together. When Ayan arrived, his usual easygoing demeanor faltered slightly at the sight of us sitting side by side on the couch, our hands intertwined. He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing something was off. "Okay," he said, dropping on the armchair across from us. "What's going on? You two look like you're about to deliver bad news." I exchanged a glance with Zane, silently willing myself to find the courage to speak. "It's complicated," I began, my voice shaky despite my best efforts to steady it. "But we owe you the truth." Ayan leaned forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "All right, hit me." Taking a deep breath, I plunged ahead. "Zane and I, we've been spending a lot of time together lately. More than you know. And, well, things have changed between us. They become more." For a moment, there was only silence. Ayan stared at us, his brow furrowed as he processed what I'd said. Then, slowly, comprehension dawned in his eyes, followed by something else, something harder to read. "So," he said finally, his tone measured, "you're telling me you two are together?" "We're trying to figure that out," Zane interjected, his voice firm but gentle. "But yes, we care about each other. A lot." Another long pause stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Then, unexpectedly, Ayan let out a low whistle, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he said, exhaling sharply. "That's not what I was expecting." My heart sank, dread pooling in my chest. "Are you mad?" He shook his head quickly, holding up a hand. No, I'm not mad. Just surprised. I mean, you're my brother," he added, pointing at Zane, "and you're my best friend." His gaze shifted to me, searching. "This is a lot to process." "I know," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "And if you need time, we'll give you time. But we couldn't keep hiding it from you." "Not anymore." Ayan sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples as though trying to stave off a headache. For several minutes, he said nothing, lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his words caught me off guard. "You guys really care about each other, huh?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost wistful. "Yes," Zane answered without hesitation. "More than anything." Ayan studied us for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then, to my astonishment, he smiled, a small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Okay," he said simply. "Okay." The relief that washed over me was indescribable, like shedding a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Over the next hour, we talked, really talked, about everything. How Zane and I had grown closer, the fears and doubts we'd wrestled with, and what this meant for our relationships moving forward. Ayan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering reassurances when needed. By the end of the conversation, the tension in the room had dissipated, replaced by a cautious optimism. "This doesn't change anything between us, right?" Ayan asked as he prepared to leave. "You're still my best friend, and you're still my brother." "Always," Zane promised, pulling him into a quick hug. "And you'll always be ours," I added, earning a grateful smile from both of them as the door closed behind Ayan. Zane turned to me, his eyes shining with emotion. "We did it," he murmured, pulling me close. "We told him." "We did," I echoed, resting my forehead against his. "And somehow it's going to be okay." In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. There were challenges, of course. Awkward family dinners, sideways glances from acquaintances, but none of it mattered as much as I'd feared. What mattered was the way Zane looked at me, like I was the center of his universe. What mattered was the way I felt when I was with him. Whole, alive, unafraid. Through it all, I realized something profound. Love isn't about avoiding risk. It's about embracing it. It's about choosing to step into the unknown, even when every instinct tells you to stay safe. And while the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to walk it, with him by my side, as we stood together on a crisp autumn evening. Watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The journey had been messy, painful, and beautiful all at once. But it had brought me here, to a place where I could finally breathe, finally believe in the possibility of happiness, and maybe that was enough.